Welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. Welcome to our webinar on the introduction to neurodiversity in the workplace. So my name is Harry Saville. I'm a managing consultant psychologist here at CiC, so working in the training and consultancy team. But I've got many years experience and my background's in supporting wellbeing and neurodiversity in the workplace, doing a lot of one-to-one coaching, but also workplace needs assessments, but also consulting with organisations on how they can create more neuro-inclusive working environments. So yeah, very happy to be with you today to kind of look through, especially if it's a topic that's new to you, thinking about what neurodiversity is, what comes underneath that, and just start thinking about what you can do differently. So what we'll go through today, defining what that term neurodiversity means, some of the common diagnosis included within that, the value of neurodiversity in the workplace, so talking through some of the common strengths, what other organisations are doing, how it's being really utilised in the workplace, the current challenges and realities in the workplace as well, some of the challenges people do have who are neurodivergent in accessing the workplace. And lastly, just thinking about what we offer at CiC, and just a little part at the end there, just to answer any questions and start thinking for yourself kind of what you can do differently in your teams, with your colleagues, with your family, but also within your organisation. As we do with all of our sessions, we're trying to be as interactive as possible. So if you've got any thoughts, any questions, if anything we're talking about really resonates with you, please do feel free to use the chat to share your thoughts and questions. We also have a Q&A function today. So if you have any questions you'd rather put in there and save for the end, that's also completely fine. As I usually say in our webinars, you sharing your top tips, your experiences, your ideas, can really resonate with a lot of people in the chat as well. So if anything, if you want to bring to the chat, that'd be really helpful. You might empower someone else here today. So starting off with our first question. So I'll explain why I'm asking this question. So what happens in your head when you add 28 plus 47? And if you're willing to share your working in the chat, that'd be great. If you'd rather not, that's totally fine. The purpose for this question is based on a LinkedIn post that was asked a couple of years ago to try and demonstrate what neurodiversity is all about. It's that idea of being able to think maybe in different ways. So the most common answer I usually get is grabbing my calculator. So if you're one of them, don't worry, that's a lot of people are the same. But if you're willing to share your thoughts in the chat, please do so. So I've got a few people sharing now. Let me have a look. So someone's gone for the 20 plus 40, then add 8 plus 7, and then I get the 75 at the end. Got a few people who've got the same there. Some people finding it difficult. Yeah, exactly. It's not for everyone. Sometimes mental maths and doing mathematical problem solving can be easy for some, difficult for others. That's again a demonstration of what neurodiversity is about. Someone else, well, adding the 7 and then adding the 40 separately, so doing it in 2 parts. Some people have tried the rounding method. I always find that really difficult in my head. It doesn't make sense to me, but a lot of people use that. I'm glad that we've had some variation, as the purpose of this is to show that we might come to the same answer, but how our route of getting there might be slightly different, which is really what neurodiversity is about. So I'm glad we've had some variation working out in the chat today. Let me see if there's any others. Some people just do it in their head immediately. Some people find it very easy to do those mental maths questions. Some people do it work it out in different ways. What else have we got here? Units carry over. Yeah, I've heard someone's put in here units carry over and then tens. So it's almost like doing it like written down, like you would do on paper. Something like visually going through it. Yeah, so I mentioned here visualizing a long addition. Yeah, exactly. So kind of going through that, having that visualizing the problem. Yeah, sorry if anyone finds this that causes them a bit of panic. Obviously, don't feel like you have to take part. It's just a strong. If something that's not your strength, it's not a nice way to start the webinar. But like I said, you're not alone there. It's like we said, the purpose of this really is to show that some people, we all have different strengths, which is what neurodiversity is about. So please keep sharing your thoughts. Thank you for those who shared their working out, but also if they found it challenging, it's really helpful. So neurodiversity is a term that refers to the natural variations in human brain function and embraces that people have different ways of thinking, learning, processing information. So similar to this maths question, we have different ways of thinking, different ways of communicating, different ways of working. And we can see that if you think about your teams, you think about your family members, your friends, we all have different ways of focusing or different ways to get the best out of ourselves. So I really love this picture to show that kind of visually how we might have all different ways of processing information. Some people more problem solving, more visual, some people more kind of big picture, some people more process driven, some people more number driven, some people more creative, and creating those teams where we have different strengths, different ways of working can help us come up with different solutions, which is something to bear in mind when we come to the strengths section later. So yeah, it really highlights that people naturally think about things differently. And so we all kind of have that unique way of doing things. Maybe have some similarities with other people, but we all think in our own way. And we all sit within that spectrum of different strengths and challenges. So it's also used, the term neurodiversity, as an umbrella term for some common learning differences and diagnoses that you may have heard of. So I've made a little diagram here just to show some of the common diagnoses that are included underneath that umbrella term. So this isn't an exhaustive list, and as the kind of awareness grows, there's always other maybe diagnoses may be added to this list as we develop as well. So yeah, so not an exhaustive list, just some of the common diagnoses that I've regularly seen in my experience. So you've got diagnoses here like dyslexia, like ADHD, like autism, Tourette's, dyscalculia, dyspraxia. Key message with this, two people, just if you hear someone with the same diagnosis, doesn't necessarily mean that two people will present in exactly the same way. There'll be common diagnosed characteristics and kind of that people associated with certain diagnosis. Doesn't mean everyone had every single one of those characteristics or those signs. Two people can have the same diagnosis but present with maybe different challenges, different strengths, and some little bits of variation within there. And also that can depend also on the individual, but also the situation someone's in. If anyone here is neurodivergent, if you think about there's certain workplaces you've worked in or certain managers where maybe those challenges didn't arise, but then moving to a different environment, there could be challenges there that aren't in other roles. So it's something that can be depending on the situation as well, the environment that you're in, which really highlights the importance of us trying to be kind of more inclusive in our working environments, so we can have a lot of power in how we create spaces for people to be at their best. Similarly, people can have multiple diagnoses. Someone's mentioned in the chat the kind of so the ADHD is just kind of a term used to describe someone who's got autism and ADHD. So thank you, perfect timing for this point. Some can have multiple diagnoses. We don't fit perfectly into one of these pigeonholes, to one of these categories. People can be dyslexic and have ADHD, dyslexic and dyspraxic. They might have a diagnosis of ADHD and autism. So that all kind of feeds into the kind of the characteristics of that individual. I think it's a bit of a crossover of two different diagnoses, two different thinking styles. So it's why I always say when I've done workplace assessments or work with managers, it's really important to not make assumptions. Although we're going through some of the common diagnoses and characteristics today, it's useful just to keep that in your mind, but always treat an individual as an individual and listen to them. What do they find challenging? What is their environment? What are their strengths? Really be open-minded to their situation. So someone's mentioned PTSD as an acquired neurodiversity. So something you might see PTSD as a consequence of some of the challenges someone's having because of neurodiversity. So PTSD we often see as a kind of part of a trauma response, an anxiety disorder. But if you I've been in an environment where you've had challenges, and I've seen that when I've been coaching people in the workplace or done workplace needs assessments, where they've had very negative experiences in a workplace where they felt maybe bullied, kind of stigmatized, or their diagnosis has been stigmatized. They feel like they've been discriminated against because of their neurodiversity. They've gone into or neurodivergence. They've gone into a new environment and found themselves being more triggered by certain behaviours within the workplace and feeling more stressed in that environment as well, kind of experiencing that panic response in certain situations. So yeah, absolutely, it's something we speak about a lot in our webinar earlier this year about the link between neurodiversity and mental health. And although they're different topics, the links are there often because of some of the challenges that arise in our environments. So again, highlights the importance of learning more about neurodiversity today and thinking about what you can do differently. So I've got a question for you now. Kind of a debatable topic here. It'd be good to hear what your thoughts are in the chat. What percentage of the population are neurodivergent? So for the purpose of this question, I'll say maybe those with a particular diagnosis. So what percentage of people are diagnosed with one of those diagnoses under that umbrella term? So a lot of people are saying around 20 to 30%. Yeah, so a few with 20, 30, 38. So a few specific answers here, 24 and 38, 40%. Someone mentioned estimated like 15 to 20. Yeah, so there's no way of knowing. Yes, good point. So we'll think about that later in the next slide as well. Why that might be. We've got a high number here, a few people saying 50%, 60%. So a bit higher than what the average participant said today. A few for 40%, 50%. Yeah, someone's mentioned here much higher than the stats says because most are undiagnosed. So you're thinking about kind of why that might be. So you can start thinking about that now. Why is that? Why are people undiagnosed? Yes, good response here. 30% diagnosed, 70% undiagnosed. Yeah, so maybe much higher than we realise. And someone's mentioned a really interesting stat here about the level of neurodivergence within the prison system, for example, being over 80%. That's a really good point. So even in certain environments, so you mentioned there in prison population, but also in different industries, something I've seen when working in different industries, with the creative industries, maybe legal industries, analytical industries, same as any role, it's going to attract certain skill sets and certain personality types. So depending on the roles you're in, you might see a high percentage or low percentage of certain diagnoses, which is really interesting. Someone's mentioned here, so yeah, the idea, I guess that idea I mentioned earlier, the idea of neurodiversity is about that human variation. So on that part, is everyone neurodiverse? But then, yeah, exactly, so there's that argument as well. So yeah, so specifically, some research here from Nancy Doyle in 2020 mentioned 15 to 20% of the population is neurodiverse. That's about roughly 1 in 7. It used to be roughly 1 in 7, 15%. I know in my time as well, of working within neurodiversity, you see this number shift, even the diagnosis rates shift as well. So seeing how, I'd use autism as an example, how it's gone from maybe a few decades ago being in 1 in 2,000, then a few decades later into 1 in 200, now more like 1 in 50. So why is that happening? There's a massive increase in, there's a massive increase in prevalence. Is there a growing awareness that's around the diagnosis? So yeah, as that awareness grows, there's going to be always more diagnosis there. The stigma attached to diagnosis as well. There's plenty of people who, maybe due to kind of the way it's perceived and the worry about being discriminated against, they might feel that they don't want to disclose or they don't want to get a diagnosis, so they're worried about how they're going to be perceived. Somebody there, the people getting diagnosis later in life is something I've seen lots about as well, where because of that lack of awareness or understanding, well, it wasn't there maybe when they were in their teens or in their 20s, whereas now when they're in their 30s, 40s, 50s, they've got a diagnosis later. Sometimes as well because of the environment they're in. Sometimes they don't start off needing a diagnosis, and something changes in their working environment, they experience some challenges, and then they realise they haven't got the coping strategies in in that situation. Oh, no, someone's just asked, yeah, about the increase. Yes, no problem. Someone's mentioned a good point here, so better diagnostic criteria, more awareness, understanding. If anyone's got any other thoughts on why this might be as well, why the increase, please do share in the chat. Someone mentioned as well, understanding women present differently to men. Absolutely, it's a really, really important point. Something that I was been lucky to watch a few panel discussions with women who are diagnosed with maybe ADHD or autism and talk about their experiences in the school system and through work and even through GPs and a lack of understanding how it might present differently in medical professionals, in teachers. So not understanding that as well leads to a lot of women going undiagnosed and then getting diagnosis later in life as well. So yeah, that's something that, again, the bridge that still needs to be kind of crossed really, and kind of increasing that awareness. See what other points are in here. If no one's got any other thoughts. So I mentioned here, the disclosure dilemma is a tough one. My experience has varied wildly, depending on the individual opinions of managers. I've had both bad and good experiences with disclosure. Yeah, absolutely. It's not uniform, is it? Sometimes you can get a really positive experience. Sometimes a manager might have very little knowledge around the topic, but they're very good at listening. I think it's one of the best skills to have. So not disclosing an environment that may not be supported may often be the best option in certain cases. Yes, unfortunately, that is the case. Something we'll talk about later as well. It's not the first time I've heard something like that, an experience like that. So it's really important, again, about how we create that psychological safety within our working environments to encourage people to feel safe to talk about their differences, ask for those differences and how they work for those adjustments. Someone's mentioned here menopause. Yeah, so that's something I've spoken about. I've seen in some research recently as well, looking at those cognitive differences you can see caused by the menopause, and sometimes that can also, especially those who are diagnosed with neurodiversity, how that can really kind of be kind of highlight some of the challenges they're having as well, make them harder to deal with. Also can lead to some acquired neurodivergence, some similar cognitive challenges that are associated with neurodiversity. Yeah, absolutely. So that's a good one. So someone's mentioned undiagnosed may feel imposter syndromes, don't want to disclose yet, sort of feeling like, oh, this doesn't affect me as much as others, or not feeling like it's something that's associated with them. Yeah, absolutely. Someone mentioned here, my adult daughter is autistic and used to mask a lot. Yeah, so a term we'll use later today as well, that idea of masking. Anyone's not used to that term, so we'll speak about later. She says that the questionnaire and the diagnostic tools didn't feel very close to her thought process and sense of self. Absolutely, yeah, that's a story I've heard a lot about in similar situations as well, where the diagnostic tool is very skewed towards a lot of male behaviour, so something you see in boys, as opposed to a lack of awareness around how that looks in females as well. So, yeah, growing awareness needed there. This is a really important point. And highlights a lot of challenges young girls and young women as well have in that process growing up, whether it be at school and early career as well. Technology being more accessible, information easier to acquire. Yeah, there's more awareness. The amount of times I've done these awareness training sessions as well, and you always hear someone saying, "Oh, this sounds like me," or "This sounds like some members of my family." So it's kind of seeing that when they have that awareness, suddenly seeing some of those traits themselves as well. So absolutely, more information, easier to acquire. Absolutely. Someone mentioned, I believe I am ADHD and have dyscalculia. How can we be sure that my issue is not just part of my character? Yeah, this is a common question I've had. It's what's the difference between a few traits and it being a diagnosis? I think it's something where you see high proportion of those traits associated with a certain diagnosis, and they're kind of something that is hard to. It's not just every so often; it's kind of more persistent. It's happening on a regular basis. So, if there's something you believe as well, might probably worth looking at some of those traits associated with those diagnoses and seeing how much of that is something that happens regularly and how much of that you associate with I'll keep moving on, conscious of time. Thank you everyone for sharing your thoughts. Sorry if I've missed anything. Obviously the chat moves quite quickly, but please keep sharing. It's really helpful. I'm loving all the kind of interactions in the chat as well. So please keep going. I'm just going to go through some of the common neurotypes as well. So sticking with these three here. So I know they're not the only three, and I'm aware of that. It's just some of the most common ones we often see. So just give you a little flavour of some of the characteristics we see with some of these diagnoses. If there's any other traits you know from some of the other diagnoses associated with neurodiversity, please do keep sharing in the chat as well. So I'll start off with dyslexia. So I'll put the dictionary definition first. So dyslexia is specific learning difficulty, which primarily affects reading and writing skills. I think that's what a lot of people associate with dyslexia, is kind of the challenges of reading and writing. I think it's what a lot of us see when we were at school, is some of those challenges. I think they're really highlighted at school as well, where we're in an environment where we have to do things a certain way. We're judged a lot on how we kind of do in tests, how we take information from textbooks. So a lot of people really struggle in school when they have dyslexia, but they leave that environment and they might move towards where their strengths are. And they find they really thrive. So yeah, some of the common challenges we see: that written processing, reading, writing, spelling, visual processing. So something people maybe know less about with dyslexia is that what people experience can be called visual stress. So especially when reading off or looking at contrasting colours. So as we look at any text, black on white background. So the idea of can lead to some people experiencing fatigue, headaches, or seeing like the words moving around the page. I had someone explain it to me once, is it looks like someone's thrown loads of words at a page and there's no lines to them, there's no order, kind of vibrating on the page. But then reading it off a different background colour, so maybe changing it to a grey to reduce the contrast, or sometimes people use visual overlays, like read off red, blue, green, whatever their preference may be. They find that the words sit better on the page and makes it easier for them to process information. Verbal processing, sometimes just getting their ideas out on the spot. Also working memories, that idea of also almost seen as like a mental sticky note, the idea of holding on to a particular task, shifting attention to one thing and coming back to that task afterwards and not leaving it or half done or like a thought half finished. But some of the common strengths here as well, it's really important to see both sides of this coin. So lots of strengths and different ways of thinking that are really valuable, and reason why a lot of people with dyslexia gravitate to certain roles. So in my work, doing a lot of workplace coaching, I've definitely seen a lot of people with dyslexia in client-facing roles and really good at kind of verbal communication. So I mentioned there's sometimes one of the challenges can also sometimes be one of the strengths. Kind of holding on and remembering that information may be a challenge, but kind of communicating well verbally, rapport building. I've worked with a lot of people in client-facing roles. A lot of people prefer communicating over the phone instead of text. Creativity, innovation, something we'll talk about later as well. It's the idea to think things outside the box, different ways of thinking. I think if you link that in with the client-facing side as well, being able to think of different solutions to problems and working with people is really valuable. And visual learning as well, so less kind of being able to think more in a creative, visual way. ADHD. I'll move on just here as well. So this stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. So that's ADHD. You may have also heard of ADD. So it's Attention Deficit Disorder minus the hyperactivity. The name itself, has a lot of kind of negative connotations to it, doesn't it? It's that kind of a deficit, the disorder. So it doesn't help with that kind of stigmatization. So hopefully something that maybe might be changed in the future. It's associated with an ongoing pattern of inattention and or hyperactivity, impulsivity. So people are going to be certain types that may be more on the inattentive side, so maybe more linked to ADD. Some people might be more on the hyperactivity, impulsive side, or a bit of both. Again, that idea of, not everyone's the same with one of these diagnoses. So some potential challenges there, even individuals I coach now, a lot of it can be around executive functioning. So what I mean by executive functions are things like organisation, planning, prioritising, sustaining attention or attention regulation. So I think common misconception with ADHD is that people are very distractible all the time and really struggle with focusing all the time. when really it can be just certain situations, certain topics, certain times of day. As we look at some of the strengths here as well, sometimes it can be the flip of that. And actually, they find they can really hyper focus on something. I think I will talk about why that might be in a second. So loving everyone's putting their thoughts in the chat about what that looks like for them. So keep sharing. Some other thoughts here, so working memory, so similar to dyslexia, some overlap there. Some other bits here, like response inhibition. Sometimes people maybe acting more impulsively, that impulsive side coming out, whether it be what they say, so maybe speaking without thinking of the consequences or thinking through what they're saying, or acting without thinking about consequences all the way through. Lastly, emotional control, so that emotional regulation. Some might experience emotions more heightened, or I know I've had some clients being accused of being maybe reactive in certain settings, because the emotions are being more heightened. But the strength side, I mentioned hyperfocus just a minute ago, thinking about that emotion, that kind of focus regulation. So although there are periods where you might find struggling to focus for long periods or struggling to stay on task, when it's an area of particular interest, something they're really passionate about, and definitely when working under pressure, find people with ADHD are really good in those crisis situations. It locks into their hyper focus where they can really focus in on something for long periods. So someone's mentioned in the chat here, so they don't get that. They get that kind of task paralysis rather than hyperactivity. Happens more in our brain. Yeah, exactly. So it's not always the same for everyone. It's perfect. Thank you for sharing that. It just shows that it is variable there. So we talk about some general points here, but always, like we said earlier, always listen to the individual and their situation. Someone's mentioned being accused of being too sensitive. Yeah, exactly. So that's something I've heard a lot as well. And that someone's mentioned, going back to that task paralysis point, so you may be feeling kind of overwhelmed, not knowing where to start, and then end up doing nothing. Just kind of struggling with that coming back to that organization, prioritizing side. Yeah, feeling kind of overwhelmed. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Something that, yeah, it just shows the kind of variation there as well. Creativity. So similar to what we said with dyslexia, that creative side, something we definitely see with ADHD because of that thinking outside the box, or thinking in tangents, or thinking really quickly as well, being able to think of solutions in a different way to others. That kind of thinking off the beaten path thinking can lead to a lot of different ideas and that others maybe don't consider. Come to the last one here. So autism, so defined as a neurological and developmental condition, affects how people interact with others, communicate, learn, behave. So potential challenges there. First of all, kind of non-verbal communication. So how people communicate might be slightly different. You might see people with autism having a preference for or struggling to understand non-verbal signs, kind of body language, or finding eye contact more uncomfortable. They might take language more literally, so not seeing sarcasm or jokes, or taking them more literally to the point. So then you start thinking about how you communicate with certain people, to communicate in a different way to help with understanding. Dealing with change, something we talk about a lot in our team, the idea of change and uncertainty. Something that for all of us is something that can be really stressful and stress-provoking. But for those with autism, any change to a routine or process can be really overwhelming. So really thinking about how you communicate that is really, really valuable. The last one here, I mentioned sensory sensitivities. This is something that I wasn't really fully aware of until I worked in a school briefly for a couple of years, and really seeing how certain individuals can have those higher sensitivities to sensory inputs in their environment. So you might have noticed certain people using ear defenders in public, or listening to music more to try and block out sound, finding lights a bit overwhelming. So that's because of those heightened sensitivities. So for those who work in office spaces, if you look around your office now, if you're in the office, or if you're in a loud environment, with quite an overstimulated environment, think about all the different kind of sensory inputs that could be really overwhelming and might cause some stress and difficulties concentrating. See a lot of people who experience that, they might become really stressed, might be more irritable, and it can be misconstrued. People don't understand why people are doing that. So starting to think about the work environment as well can really help a lot of people focus. Potential strengths. So you see a lot of autism and work programs now trying to tap into a lot of these skills. So kind of analytical, attention to detail, pattern recognition, process driven. So maybe different. Someone with ADHD maybe prefers more novelty and something new and jumping into something new. Someone with autism might prefer kind of a detailed process and removing that potential change. So it kind of leads to a lot of reliability, which I think is really valuable as well. So I'll have a quick look in the chat now. Sorry if I've missed some of your points, but thank you everyone for sharing. So I've mentioned here, so sensory sensitivity is a big one for me. Some people in our office insist on having all the lights on, even when the daylight is bright. Yeah, and sometimes it's like the type of light, the artificial light. Sometimes people can see the flicker rate. Sometimes people can hear the light when it's on. Sometimes the temperature as well. You know, there's always that. I know I've been in offices where it's a battle over the temperature of the office. So thinking about that as well could be really can cause some issues. Yes, especially someone mentioned sitting next to someone new in the office every day, especially a lot of us now hybrid working. You don't have a set desk anymore. You're coming in, you have to book a desk or just sitting somewhere different. That kind of lack of stability to variation each day can be quite overwhelming. And also if someone's got their desk set up a certain way, they know they can work there. That kind of coming into the office and not knowing if they can be able to concentrate to their best in that environment can be really overwhelming. John mentioned here, it's important to note that autistic ADHD traits are all human traits. A lot of neurotypical people will have some of these traits. Absolutely, yeah. So like we talked about earlier, you know, some people who see some of the traits we talk about here and say, oh, I'm experiencing some of this, some of that. So absolutely, there is some variation there, but not to diminish, you know, those diagnoses. Obviously, the difference is when it is that kind of consistent and there's a high quantity of those traits that we see with those diagnoses, where that's where the differences are. So yeah, absolutely, it's we're in there somewhere, but there's certain kind of collections of traits that lead to those diagnoses. Someone's mentioned about recording, so I'll say now, yeah, we'll be sharing the slides on our Ellie platform as well, and sharing on our YouTube channel. So the recording will be available afterwards. I'm just going to share this question. I'll open the chat and have a look at your thoughts. But we've talked about a lot of strengths there around creativity, innovation, verbal communication, rapport building, strategic thinking, hyperfocus, working under pressure, attention to detail, pattern recognition, process driven. So what neurodivergent skills would your organisation or team benefit from, or what do they benefit from? You might have someone in your team who is neurodivergent and you see certain skills that are really valuable to you. So please do share kind of what skills would benefit you and your team. I know there's some people here who might work in more creative industries. I know I've seen in some creative teams where there's a high percentage of people with dyslexia, for example. Might be people in certain roles with a high percentage of people with autism. So what skills there would you see as valuable for the work you do? We have a look now. Someone mentioned attention to detail. Yeah, absolutely. It's the idea of the analytical side. If you're in a role that requires a lot of attention to detail, might be really valuable. Someone's mentioned here that the sensory sensitivities is increased. Yeah, so that kind of, or start to notice you struggle with it more. Yeah, so that's maybe linked to the side effects of it, like the fatigue being harder to deal with, maybe. Yeah, so that could be really challenging. Maybe it also depends on the changing environments. Maybe there's more sensory inputs in the work you're doing now, or just in general, you know, in our lives. Someone's mentioned here, all these skills are valuable in most organisations. Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think a lot of them are. Are there anything there that for that person, any of those skills here that are particularly valuable in the work you do? Strategic thinking. In finance, most of these skills are really helpful. Yes, the idea of, I guess, absolutely. Yeah, I think I can see that. Process driven, all of them. I'm glad a few people have said here the value of all of these. Yeah, it's like comes back to that picture I had at the start with neurodiversity, different thinking styles. And we're all about building teams with all those different variety of skill sets that helps us, you know, approach different problems in different ways and we'll be able to solve a variety of different problems. Someone's mentioned here thinking outside the box as a result of needs of brain stimulation from new interesting ideas and experiences. Yeah, so that kind of seeking out new experiences. Yeah, something we see with people with ADHD. So I've mentioned I'm in education, and my hyper-focus has helped with creativity, innovation, keeping the team on track, organisation, and working under pressure. Yes, especially when it's something you really, really care about and passionate about. Really deep dive into that and keep people on track as well. Someone's mentioned maybe the side effects of this. So too much attention to detail, hyperfocus can produce, or sometimes thorough analysis, great quality products, but get lost down rabbit holes sometimes. Yeah. So yeah, I feel hyperfocus is kind of a double-edged sword sometimes. It's sometimes really helpful, but sometimes it can be quite exhausting, can't it? Where we're locked into something and go down those rabbit holes and affects other priorities. Yeah. So kind of something I've worked on with people in coaching, thinking about how do we use this, but not burn ourselves out. Is really important. Someone's mentioned dyslexic thinking is now a skill on LinkedIn. Yeah, it's one of my upcoming slides. So thank you for referencing that. Yeah, it's definitely. So it's really kind of changing the narrative away from that stigmatized reading and writing and more towards those skills. I'll keep moving. I'm conscious of time. We've got a few more slides to get through. So thank you, everyone. But keep thinking about how these skills are valuable to you and start thinking about how do we utilize these. So yeah, it's a few kind of, again, flipping the narrative, thinking about the value of neurodiversity. There's a few interesting reports here, thinking about how we build neurodiversity into our workplace and thinking about the future workforce as well. Something's becoming more and more valuable and more important in this world of AI as it grows more into our daily lives. So Harvard Business Review, first of all, coined neurodiversity as a competitive advantage, to see neurodivergent talent as an untapped talent pool. With great potential to fill roles in maybe emerging professions and plug the talent gap in certain industries. Especially in a world where we think about with AI, with a lot of automation is happening now. A lot of those administrative role tasks that we do are becoming more automated. So what are the skills that are becoming more valuable? Is it those problem solving, creativity, people skills? So thinking about that is an important part of this slide. And that's a message that was echoed here with EY their report on so the value of dyslexia, and so highlighting the value of these skills we just spoke about in the future workforce. So in that world of AI, automation, thinking about what skills are more valuable and really championing them. So I think that's really important. Yeah, so someone mentioned in the chat the fact that LinkedIn has added dyslexic thinking as a personal skill. So if anyone was unaware of that, who is dyslexic or knows someone who is, and some of those skills resonate with you, yeah, it's a useful one to add in. Again, just helping to change that narrative, helping to celebrate the skills associated with dyslexia. It's added to the dictionary as well, the idea of dyslexic thinking. I mentioned this, and if anyone joined our kind of neuro-inclusive inclusivity session as well, on our Neurodiversity Celebration Week session, looking at kind of the neurodiversity programs and the high productivity we see when we build that neuro-inclusivity. There's growing evidence around kind of the value of neuro-inclusivity, and when you make those adjustments to how people work, you see the increases in productivity. So a few examples here of some different neurodiversity programs that already exist. So Microsoft's got their neurodiversity hiring program, looking to hire people with a range of neurodifferences, that's autism, ADHD, dyslexia. Also got an employee resource group called Neurodiversity at Microsoft. So it helps people kind of get together, talk about some kind of share tips and tools and create awareness for neurodiversity as well. I always find those are really useful. Those employee resource groups helps you get some free advice on your processes and policies and what you can do differently. So SAP is a German multinational software corporation. So they've actively promoting neurodiversity. They have an autism at work program and an employee resource group, an ERG as well. JP Morgan Chase, they've also got a neurodiversity program, that autism at work program. They were one of the ones who've done some research into their productivity when you have those adjustments. And people are going through their program, their recruitment program, where they train people, give people opportunity to have adjustments in their role. They saw that kind of 90 to 140% productivity increase from their autism at work initiative compared to those who aren't within that team. EY got their Neurodiversity Centres of Excellence that aims to promote neurodiversity in the workplace across different organisations. HP, so Hewlett Packard Enterprise, got their Dandelion program, so recruiting, training employees with autism in roles within software testing, analytics, cybersecurity. Goldman Sachs, I'll keep going on these. There's loads and loads of different ones here. I'll have a look at the chat if anyone's got any other suggestions. If you've seen any other neurodiversity programs, if you've got one yourselves, please do feel free to share in here as well. You know, it might be really useful for someone. And also people here who have children who are neurodiverse. I think this is really important just to help people see. You know, the world of work is changing to really adapt to their needs. So although some of the challenges they may have had at school, hopefully the workplace looks a lot brighter. Someone's mentioned, yeah, in the chat here, so that I had no idea about these programs. Just hope for the future. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, always worth. There's constantly growing awareness. People always trying to tap into these different skills and change their workplace a bit. It's all about trying to create a more productive environment, isn't it? We're using the term neurodiversity, but really it's about people management and getting the best out of everyone. So it's a way that it helps from a well-being and psychological safety standpoint, but also helps them with from a productivity standpoint as well. Thinking about neuro-inclusivity, if some of you have joined our session last month looking at creating your inclusive working environment, you might have some answers for this, but what barriers might neurodivergent candidates or employees face in the workplace? So you can see there's a lot of good work happening, but what challenges might people experience at the moment, and what might people have experienced already? Has anyone got any ideas? Discrimination, first one there. So yeah, thinking about how they're going to be perceived. I guess why is that discrimination happening? Anyone got ideas? Response inhibitions, difficulty, being mistaken as kind of aggressive. Yeah, I totally have seen that myself with, I've coached people being accused of being reactive, aggressive, absolutely. So a few people have mentioned, sorry if I've missed people sharing their examples of what their organisation's doing. It's great to see. Please do keep sharing. I'm sure everyone else is keeping up in the chat. My company is a neurodiverse group who meet online once a month. Yeah, so it's useful to have that there. The one I've found is someone who has around 3 job changes a year and has worked in construction for 20 years. The interview itself, so I've mentioned here, so the challenges, going back to the challenges to neuro-inclusivity or challenges for candidates and employees. Yeah, the interview is a big one. The amount of times I've heard people saying, I know I can do this role, but I really struggle with the current recruitment stages, expressing my abilities in those interview stages. And they can be quite rigid, can't they, how they're done. So yeah, neuro-inclusive recruitment is a big one. Lack of understanding. Yeah, just thinking about this discrimination and stigma, to the point we mentioned earlier, that lack of understanding leads to assumptions, leads to people worrying about or not understanding how people might present or judging them for what they may or may not be able to do. Yeah, lack of understanding, a few of you mentioned here, being misunderstood. A few of you mentioned specific challenges like eye contact, social skills, yeah, group projects. So I've mentioned here, so my son is looking for work and doesn't think he can cope with full-time work due to his anxiety levels associated with ASD. So for those not sure, ASD is short for autism spectrum disorder. You might have also heard of autism spectrum condition. So they're just diagnostic terms for autism. Yeah, finding suitable part-time work is very tricky. Yeah, I can imagine that's challenging, and I suppose, especially if you're aware of kind of how those environments might cause some anxiety, it can become that kind of, it can be really difficult to deal with. Yeah, I think something that we hope in the future, you know, that could be managed better, and they can have an opportunity to manage those anxiety levels, or that the work environment causes less anxiety. But yeah, that could be really tricky. People treating every diagnosis, type presentation the same. Yeah, yeah, that's definitely something I've heard. And even within a diagnosis, I've heard people say they've told their manager or their team about having a diagnosis, but then the individual is the managers kind of just told them what they need to help them, but not listen to what they need. Yeah, so that kind of lack of listening. It's one of the best things you can do, really, is as much as it's useful to learn about this, just thinking about how you listen to individuals is really key. Barriers to progression, opportunities, yeah, that kind of discrimination against you because of those differences. Not working fast enough, targets, being accused of being rude or ignorant. Disbelief that people are neurodivergent, so kind of lack of trust, like, are you really, not just part of their personality, is kind of kind of judging you or not taking it seriously. Anything else? Accused of not being a team player. So yeah, so how people communicate or preferring to work kind of maybe less as part of a team, more on their own. People misconstrue that for different reasons. Blankness in interviews, can request questions in advance. Yeah, it's something that I often have debates about in neuro-inclusive recruitment sessions for people. So you always hear the classic line of, oh, it's unfair to give people the interview questions beforehand. If you think about it, what is the advantage you're giving? You're giving everyone an opportunity to process their responses appropriately. It helps you find the best person for the role. It's something it's definitely a useful adjustment. It's a very good example of an adjustment in an interview setting. Navigating support, so that's accessible. So knowing what support's there, is it accessible support? What else is there? So when getting a diagnosis, being accused of it being all they talk about, and discussing amendments, yeah. And sometimes, sometimes people don't want to talk about that. If they've got a diagnosis, don't want to have to do that. Sometimes, I'm sure a lot of people on this call it resonates with them, feeling like you have to use diagnosis to have been taken seriously. Some people have experienced that where it's not necessarily a massively supportive culture. They've had to use that diagnosis to kind of be listened to. A lack of communication between managers, and the neurodivergent candidates, so opportunities could be missed. Yeah, absolutely. Eye contact. Yeah, here you hear some recruiters saying, "Oh, this particular individual is really bubbly, really personable," when someone else may not be. But then, there's that discrimination. Prioritizing someone who's more you get on with better, as opposed to someone who's better for the role. Reasonable adjustments only being from a defined list. Yeah, not being people-centered. So yeah, being very kind of rigid. Kind of highlights that lack of understanding as well, doesn't it? Kind of why it's there and what they can do, what's within their power to put in place. So I always find the kind of recruitment, one of the manager sessions, really helpful to help build confidence in what they can do and what's in their power. A lot of people kind of tread on eggshells around the topic. I'm not sure what they should do. For sure. I'll share some ideas now, just conscious of time, so I'll keep moving. So that awareness a lot of you spoke about leads to that stigma. Inconsistent approaches, I find when it's not part of policy, you get people who one manager does things one way, one manager does another way, can cause some issues. No clear adjustment processes in recruitment or talent management, rigid ways of working. The built environment, thinking back to those sensory sensitivities we spoke about earlier. Communication styles, people being accused of being aggressive or not a team player, so not understanding different communication styles. I think you've all mentioned a lot of these, so yeah, it's been a really good chat so far, seeing everyone sharing what their experiences are and how that's made them feel. So yeah, thank you everyone. So yeah, thinking about psychological safety. So someone mentioned earlier today about masking, so what we mean by masking is where people might have a diagnosis, they might have some challenges in a particular environment, but they're worried about how they're going to be perceived. Often we spoke about that lack of awareness, the stigma they might experience, discrimination. So they act how they feel they should act, they mask the differences, which can lead to a lot of fatigue and mental health challenges as well. People can come back from their day at work where they've had to try and fit in to that environment and be really exhausted, kind of really leads to that burnout. We've seen a lot of people. And you see that kind of that masking is due to that lack of psychological safety. So this slide put together to look at kind of the feelings people have about their work environment. So this is from the Neurodiversity and Business Report. This is from the 2023 edition. There's a yearly edition, so it'll be interesting to see how that looks in 2025. But 65% of neurodivergent employees fear discrimination from management. 55% of neurodivergent employees fear discrimination from colleagues. So I think that's over half in both situations. And they're worried about how they're going to be perceived. They're going to hide those differences. And it leads to people often only reaching out for support, maybe when they're more in a crisis situation. So it stops you as an organisation to help make proactive support. So it's one thing to take away from today, something we talk about a lot in our neuroinclusivity sessions, is think about what you can do to create psychological safety. How do you encourage people to access support, be open with you from the starting point? You can't force people to disclose anything, but how do you create a safe environment where people want to do that? So think about now, what can you do to create a psychologically safe environment? Or is there anything you're doing already? That'd be useful to see what people are saying. So please do share your thoughts in the chat. Someone shares the health adjustments passport. Yeah, it's a nice way I like to look at it. So we've spoken about previously this year in workplace preferences, kind of thinking about, do we need people to just talk about from a diagnosis perspective, or are we just talking about how people work, what your working preference is, what do you find helpful, what makes you more productive, what do you find challenging? Yeah, and that workplace adjustment passport helps normalize it, kind of. Although we talk about neurodiversity, it helps make it more about individual needs. It helps it be more inclusive. People don't feel like they're being singled out. I feel that they're really useful. Any other ideas? How do you create psychological safety? How do you create an environment where people feel safe to share those differences? Or is there anything you could do? So accepting people, to working with each individual strengths, regardless of diagnosis. Yeah, wellbeing rooms. Is there anything that you can do as managers? Any managers here? What can you do to help your team feel more secure and open with you? Yeah, so I mentioned here, leadership plays an important role. So how do you create that? How do you create that culture? Role modeling, yeah, excellent idea. The amount of times I've heard managers say, oh, I can't help them if they don't come to me and don't talk to me about it. This is true, but also what could you do to help encourage them? So yeah, communication, manager awareness, being open, normalizing conversations, yeah, kind of developing manager packs, helping it's a good idea, helping to kind of formalize that kind of manager knowledge. Everyone's gonna have the same experience. See some organizations where, if you're with one manager, you have a great time. Different manager, it can be, be less accepting. So yeah, kind of building that into their responsibilities. Be vulnerable as a manager. Yeah, exactly. You're being vulnerable, other people feel vulnerable to do the same. Yeah, safe place to fail. How you talk to people about those if they've had challenges, learn from it collectively. Absolutely. And this is a term we use from a neurodiversity point of view, but also from a mental health wellbeing perspective, something that's useful about from all these perspectives. So yeah, someone mentioned here, a lot of managers I find want to help but don't know how to. Yeah, that's something I hear a lot. That's why I always find the manager awareness sessions so valuable, because they want to say the right thing, but they're worried about saying the wrong thing or not sure what to say or what to do. So helping build their confidence in proactively doing that is so important. You can reach a lot more people, make a massive impact from supporting managers. Yes, that manager awareness and helping them understand what's there and what they can do is so important. Same with from a well-being and mental health perspective as well. Thank you everyone for sharing your thoughts in the chat. I'll just leave a little bit of time for questions. So a little bit about what's available at CiC. So knowledgeable staff around neurodiversity. We have our Ellie Wellbeing Program platform, which is our kind of Netflix style information center. You've got loads of podcasts, you've got links to information. So if you want to find out more, and previous webinars as well, it's all on there. So have a look if you have access. If you're not sure if you've got access, just reach out to your organization's relationship manager. They'll be able to give you some more information, or just inquire as well. Training on neurotypes and particular teams, something we can offer in our team, looking at managers, recruitment, built environment, all those different policies, things like that. And also obviously consulting on how you create those new inclusive environments. There's an example here of the screenshot, of the Ellie platform, so you can see what that looks like. So we've got a few different talks. If you want to find out more, links to previous talks we've done on neurodiversity and all our other kind of webinar streamed as well. So have a little explore, see what else you can find. So thank you everyone for listening. I'm just going to open up a poll now as well, so you can share your thoughts on today. But if you've got any questions, please feel free to share them now. I'll have a look at the Q&A as well. But thank you for listening. If you need to jump off, please feel free to do so. We'll be sharing the recording later today as well. Thank you, everyone. If you need to leave, absolutely fine. Thank you for all your feedback. If you've got any questions, please feel free to ask. I'll stick around for a little bit. So I've mentioned here, CiC offers workplace coaching. Something we're starting to explore. Yeah, so if something if you want to find out more, please do inquire, and we can chat to you about what that looks like and what we can offer. Someone asked about the recording. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, no problem. It's not a problem. We will be sharing the recording afterwards on the Annie platform, but also on the YouTube channel as well. So the link should be available soon. Someone's mentioned about workplace coaching. Yeah, I think for the invite as well, I think it's through my email address. If you want to inquire more, please do inquire that way. If you want to find out more, I'm happy to share some information. Or through the inquiry email. I'll have a look for it after we're finished here. I can share that in the chat as well. Got one question here. It's quite a good one. So how do you suggest balance support and duty? Yeah, it's definitely from a managing perspective, always really useful, isn't it? Really difficult even managing kind of what expectations within the team, but also kind of the support. I think I'm seeing support as that way of helping, and also your own responsibilities as well. Sorry, I should add, just got your responsibilities, and managing your own mental health as well can be challenging, and your own needs. So we talk about a lot in our manager sessions about boundary setting and how you manage your own boundaries and prioritize yourself. I think mentioning that to your team as well helps normalize. Again, we talk about vulnerability, talking about you being vulnerable and what your needs are, will help them feel safe to do the same. But I guess not neglecting those that are supporting others in favor of yourself, but just if you need a moment, then you can always say when you are free to support that individual. I think is useful. Someone's mentioned here about sometimes other team members who moan about others having benefits that they don't have. Yes, sometimes when they lack of awareness of why it's happening, I guess with the adjustment conversations, that's something that's always useful to build in. Is like, how do you want to communicate with this with the team? Because once they understand why it's happening, often they are less kind of resentful for it. So I think that's definitely useful. Someone's mentioned about manager sessions. It's something, yeah, we offer within our team and trainings, looking at awareness in terms of how to manage wellbeing conversations, manage kind of that neuro-inclusive management. So it can be really tailored to particular situations. So if you want to find out more, please do reach out. Okay, everyone, I'm sure you've got meetings to be in or lunches to get. So thank you for listening. We'll have a webinar next month as always. So look after yourselves. See you next time.